Sydney Sweeney stood behind the curtain, her hands shaking. Lights were too bright on stage, the voices too loud. The energy to muck her chest felt tight of every breath. Hirsch had just come off an exhausting press tour. Barely slept, barely ate, just smiled, answered questions, posed, moved. Repiathy all wanted something real from her, but they didn't care if she broke while giving either manager's voice buzzed in her ear. You're on in 5, smile. Remember the story about the hiking trip? People loved that one, her. Lips parted but no words came her. Throat closed up her eyes. Burnage turned away from the crew and ducked behind a column, clutching her sides as the tears Kamesh hadn't cried in months. But tonight she was not okay now. One notice said no, one stop at exit, one man he had arrived quiet line at a part of the Chowsnat. It's part of the show just. Visiting the venue because an old friend had invited him. Keanu Reeves stood in the shadows. Watching notice Sydney slip away, he saw the way her body curled like a child hiding from the world, and something in him moved, walked softly. Slowly, not wanting to startle, Herc didn't speak, not Yethi, just sat on the floor near her, a respectful distance away. She felt his presence before she saw him. Her breath caught, her head turned a dand when she saw him. She blinked like she wasn't sure he was real. I'm not here to fix anything, he said gently, just brought some tea. He held out a cupid, was warm steam rising, soft lanot, a paper cup from Kataringa, real ceramic warmth. Kind you only bring if you mean to stay. Sydney stared at other fingers, trembling as she took itch. Didn't drink, not right away, just held it. Warmth anchoring her. They keep asking for pieces of me, she whispered. I don't know how to give more without losing myself. Keanu didn't rush to reply, looked at her like he was listening with his whole body, not just his ears. You're not a product, he said. You're a person. Tired people deserve rest, not performance. That hit her hard. A sob escaped her lips, not loud but deep and raw. Didn't flinch, didn't lean in. Ither just stayed beside her, his silence giving her space outside. The crowd cheered. Samin called her name, but in that small pocket of backstage darkness, time paused. Her tears kept falling, but slower, now softer, not because everything was fine, but because someone saw her pain and didn't look away. And you looked out toward the hallway, stood slowly. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Sydney looked up, startled, but he was already walking, true to his word. Return at this time with a blanket hand. A second cup of tea. He placed the blanket over her shoulders like he'd done it 100 times. No fuss, no dramathon. He sat again, this time a little closer, but not to closet. They sipped in silence. Something about that moment to strangers, one unraveling, one holding space, felt sacred. After a while spoke again. I was supposed to go out there and talk about how happy I am, how grateful, how lucky. Her voice cracked. But all I feel is empty. Keanu nodded slowly. People confuse gratitude with pretending everything's fine. It's okay to have both. Gratitude and pain can sit in the same room. She looked at him, really looked. Why are you being kind to me? You don't even know me, he smiled. Soft and tired, because someone once brought me tea when I broke down backstage. And then he looked away like he'd said to Mucker. Eyes widened. You. He nodded. Years ago. Different city. Different life. Same feeling. Like the world was too loud and I was too small. And a woman I barely knew handed me tea and didn't ask me to smile. Just sat with me. Sydney's throat tightened again, but this time the tears didn't come. Instead, she felt something shift inside her. Something fragile but not broken. Keanu looked at her cup. You should drink it before it gets cold. She deed on. Small sip, then another, and slowly the color returned to her face. Simone knocked on the nearby wall. Sydney, 3 minutes. Her body jolted, the pressure rushed back. Binoche wasn't alone. An itch stood slow lie. Just at the blanket, wiped her cheeks and looked at him. Thank you. He stood tuna dead. Reached into his coat, pocket handed her a folded note. Open it when you need it most. Not before she took it, clutched it tight, walked toward the stage, but turned back one last time. Was already gone, just like fattened for the first time in weeks. Walked on stage, not because she had Tobu, because she chose Tobu, because she remembered. She was more than applause, more than headlinge, was a human being. Someone had reminded her of that with A blanket hand, warm-teened, a silence that held her. Together. The applause still rang in her ear. Sydney stepped off stage, slowly, her face frozen in a smile, but her hands were still trembling. She passed the same crew, same voices, the same chaos, but now it felt different, like she was watching it from behind. A glass wall. She kept walking until she reached a same corner where she had broken down earlier. Was empty. No sign of him. No Tino. Blanket, just silence, but something inside her had shifted, touched the pocket where she had folded the note. Still unopened, still waiting. Thought about reading it right then, but somehow she knew it wasn't time. Thought night. Back in her hotel room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Messages from agents, brands, press, friends, even strangers, but the one person she wanted to hear from was silent. Keanu hadn't left a number, no email, no card, just a folded note in a warm moment hand. Yet she didn't feel abandoned, edgy. Felt synced. Next morning, she opened her door and found a paper bag sitting quietly on the floor. No name side was a fresh scone and a small thermos of tea. Same Kinchimo Melio Sugarno. Nope, bet. She smiled back. Oh, she knew. She stepped out into the hallway and looked around. Nothing. Her heart beat a little steady over the next few days. Sydney kept going. Interviews continued, lights, the makeup, the rehearsals, the cameras, but something had changed in her rhythm. She paused between appointments, breath deeper and sometimes she was alone in a dressing room or standing quietly at the edge of a shoot. Would imagine Keanu's voice, soft and steady. You're not a product. You're a person. Those words echoed in her mind like a shield, and every morning without fail there was a paper bag at her doorways. The Samia, Sconia, Thermosno, Namino, explanation, but always warm own night. After a long day of filming under cold rain and fake smiles, Sydney sat on her hotel balcony wrapped in a sweater. City lights blinked. Belush held the thermos in both hands. Slowly she took out the folded note. Her fingers hesitated, her breath caught bit. Then she opened it. The paper was soft creased with Carethi. Handwriting was neat, simple. It read, Dear Sydney, some days will break you quietly, not like a storm, but like a soft whisper. That says you're not enough, but even on those days, you are still whole, you are still worthy, and someone out there is rooting for you. To remember that tea helps, but kindness helps more. Keep breathing, keep showing up, only when it's your choice. Her chest tightened, but it wasn't pain. It was something else, your warmth that filled the space her fear used to live in. Next morning, left a note by the door, just one word, thank. Yano one replied. No one knock a butt. The tea still camioned. That was in Otwo. Days later, she was backstage again, another venuana. The crowded against nerves came, but this time she knew how to ground herself. She held her tick closed, her eyes and remembered that she didn't need to give pieces of herself to be worthen. Something unexpected happened. A crew member tapped her shoulder. There's someone asking for you. Backstage entrance, her heart skippitch, walked carefully toward the side. Hallen there, he was you, reeves standing like he had. For a quattrochenth smiled when he saw her. Smiled back this time. She didn't crish, didn't tremblesh, just walked to him and hugged him gently. Thank you. She whispered, return the hug, warm and solid. How are you feeling? He asked softly. Not perfect, she said, but better. Like I'm learning how to hold myself together. He nodded. That's the real work. Not pretending, but holding. They sat again, just like before, on the floor. Away from the lights, two people in a world that asked too much. Sydney looked at him carefully. Why did you come back? His eyes softened. Because sometimes we don't need answers. We just need someone who remembers what it felt like. She nodded slowly, then. With quiet courage, she asked, what happened that night when you broke down backstage? Keanu looked down at his hands, then out toward the shadows. It was years ago. I lost someone close, and the world kept spinning, demanding smiles and stories, and I couldn't keep up. I didn't know how to grieve and be a public figure at the same time. He paused, his voice steady but heavy. Someone noticed. She was a costume assistant, brought me tea, didn't say much. Just sat there while I unraveled. Sydney listened without speaking, just like he had done for her. I never forgot her. He continued, and I promised myself, if I ever saw someone breaking quietly, I'd do the same. not fix. Just show up. Tears pricked her ice, but she held them back this time. Not because she was hiding them, but because she was holding space for him. Sat together for a long time, no clock, no countdown, just the soft rhythm of shared silence. When it was time for her to go on, Stagesh stood up. Stronger, not because she had to pretend, but because she remembered who she wasn't, and as she walked away. Keanu called out gently, "Don't forget tea helps, but kindness helps more." She turned, smiled wide, and nod dead, stepped into the lights net, afraid this time not alone, because sometimes the softest moments are the ones that stay the longest, and the quietest acts of kindness echo louder than any applause. The next morning, Sydney woke up before sunrise for once. It wasn't anxiety that pulled her out of bed, it was something else, a kind of stillness, like the quiet after a storm. She wrapped herself in a hoodie, opened the window, and let the morning air touch her skin. It was cold, but not cruel. Hotel was silent, except for the humming elevator and the distant city sound. Looked at the door. Paper bag was there as always, a scone and warm tea. She picked it up and held it like a secret thought. She sat by the window, sipped slowly, and thought about the promise in Keanu's voice, just show up. Later that day, she had to attend a large media event or carpet pressions of flashing camera. She had done it 100 times, but today she didn't want to perform. She wanted to be realign the dressing room. Her stylist held up 2 gowns. This one screams star. This one says grounded artist. What do you want to be tonight? Sydney smiled softly. I just want to be me. She chose the simpler, gownless glitter, more space to breathe when she stepped out of the van. The cameras exploded. Something was different. She didn't shrink under the noise. Ish didn't lose herself. In the storms smiled, but not because she had Tosh smiled, because she remembered who she was behind the curtain, and that made all the differencers past. In a blur, photos, interviews, laughs, real laughs, conversations that felt meaningful, thirsts. It felt hollow, bought through it all. She kept touching the charm. She had placed in her pocket a small tea leaf wrapped in silk, a gift from Keanu the night before, just a reminder. He had said that stillness is not weakness after the event. She went to her hotel and opened her phone. Dozens of missed message zone from her father. Saw you on TV. Proud of you. Don't forget to rest. Another from her best friend. You looked calm. Like really calm. That's new. Are you okay? Sydney thought for a second, untyped back. Not perfect. But I'm learning how to breathe again just before midnight. There was a knock on her door, not from Staffnet, from press, just a soft, quiet knock. She opened. Keanu stood there with 2 cups. Figured you might want to share tea tonight instead of drinking it alone. Sydney stepped aside without speaking, entered. Calm and steady as ever, he sat on the couch. Lights low. Hay poured the tea into glass mugs. No sugar, no milk, just warmth. How was the event? He asked loud. She said, but I didn't feel lost in it. Not like before. He nodded. That's progress. Not perfection. Just progress. She smiled. You talk like someone who's been through every version of breakdown. There's, he laughed, lightly close. I've had a few chapters. What helped you get through them? She asked, leaning forward honestly. He said, people who didn't try to fix me.
Promise.
Just let me unravel and return to myself on my own time. She sipped slowly. I'm still unraveling. Good.
Oh.
He said gently, that means you're not pretending anymore. They sat in silence for a while, and not awkward, just quiet, like 2 souls who didn't need to fill space with noise. After a long pause, Sydney spoke. Do you ever feel like everyone expects you to be this unshakable thing? It's like if you fall apart, the world will say, "How dare you? You had it all?" Keanu's face grew serio. She looked at her and said quietly, "Every single day." Sydney leaned back. "I thought it was just me. It's all." "Of us," he said, "anyone who's ever been put on a stage, literally or not, we're allowed to feel. We're allowed to fall apart. They just forget we're human." She blinked away tears. "How do you remember that when the world forgets?" Keanu tilted his head. "I surround myself with people who see the human first. Not the name, not the headlines, just the heart underneath." Sydney nodded. "I want that." He looked at her kindly. "You're already building it. Just keep showing up as yourself. Even when it's messy." She smiled at that. "Especially when it's messy." She had dead. They both laughed at it. Wasn't loud, but it's real kind that reaches deep and warms you from the inside. When he stood to leave, she followed him to the door. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked. Softly paused. "Do you want to?" She nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." He smiled, tipped an imaginary hatant, walked into the hallway, closed the door, her chest full of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hoping at the loud kin, not the dramatic movie kin, just the quiet, steady kind that whispered to her, "Going to be okay, maybe not tota maybe, not tomorrow, but soon." Because someone had brought her teen, reminded her that she didn't have to be strong alone. The next few days felt like a quiet turning of the tide. Sydney moved through her schedule of tuition stance. Something had changed inside Hirsch, no longer braced for every question. Like a wave ready to crash, instead stood in herself steady haven. When the world around her pulled in every direction, paper bags still came each morning. Tea was always warm. Scone always soft, but what mattered more was the knowing Simone out there was reminding her quietly, gently, that she was not alone. And in return, Zidnia began noticing other skinga, makeup artist with tired eyes who smiled to Whittia, production assistant who dropped things and whispered apologies under her breath, and extra who stayed behind after a shoot to pick up trash. No one asked them to. These people had stories tune visible on hurt. Important tone. Afternoon. Sydney sat beside the assistant who had been running coffee all day. "How are you?" she asked, handing her a small sandwich. Girl looked surprised. "Me." Sydney nodded. "Yeah. You've been on your feet since morning." The girl's eyes filled with tears, wiped them quickly, and said, "No one's ever asked me that before." Sydney smiled softly. They should have. After Thatch started keeping extra snacks in her bag, offering them quietly, asking gentle questions, leaving handwritten notes behind 4 crew members. It looked overwhelming thing, grandest moments of kindness, and the more she gave, the lighter she felt. Tone Evening was called to do a late-night reshoot on a cold soundstage, stood wrapped in a long coat. Shivering slightly, her phone buzzed with bad news. Another magazine had twisted her recent interview into something. Drama teacher heart sank. Old panic started crawling in thought, fear that no matter what she did, it was never and never right. Just as the tears started to prick her eyes, a crew member approached quietly. "Someone left this for you by the entrance." It was a flask of tea still warmed, a napkin with a single sentence written in neat handwritten. "You are not their story. You are your own." She turned around, searching the shadow sand there. He was standing near the wall, arms folded, eyes soft. She walked over slowly. "How did you know?" "You looked like you needed to be reminded," he said. "And besides, tea helps." She let out a quiet laugh. "You always say that because it's true," he said. "But only if you drink it." She took a sip. Warmth hit her throat and made her eyes sting, not because it hurt, but because it felt like Curran. A world that often only took this felt like someone giving back. "They twisted everything I said," she murmured. "Turned it into drama." Keanu nodded. "They don't know you. They know what sells, but it still hurts." "Of course it does," he said. "Pain doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives." She looked at him. "How do you survive all this?" He took a slow breath. "I stopped trying to survive it. I started living alongside it." Sydney tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means the noise will never stop. The eyes will always be watching, but you don't have to let them steal your peace. You can keep a small corner inside yourself that belongs only to you." She stared into the tea. "What if I don't know how to find that corner?" He smiled gently. "You already did. The night you cried behind the curtain. The night you let yourself feel instead of pretending. That was your first step toward that corner." The silence wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Do you ever miss your old life? She asked before the fame. Keanu was quiet for a long time, and he said, I miss the quiet, yes. But I don't miss hiding. I like being real, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She nodded slowly. Me too, just then the director called for her time to shoot, stood up, steadied herself. Will you wait? He smiled always. She walked back into the lights with a little more peace in her chest that night. After the reshoot, she found another note slipped into her coat pocket. This one read, When the world is loud, become the quiet one the world demands. Give gently, you don't have to burn out to be seen lit. Your stillness, Spexy, folded the note, held it to her chest and let herself. Cribbit, not from furthest times, cried because she was healing, not fast, not loud, but relearned deep kind of healing. That happens when someone sees you and doesn't ask you to be more than you are. 2 months passed. Settings changed, sets, changed faces, changed bats. Something inside Sydney stayed the same. Her stillness, her gentleness, her presence. She had become the kind of person she once desperately needed, not because someone told her to, because someone showed her. However, where she went, Nosh carried a small thermos in her bag and stack of handwritten notes, hort wunschenest, one sounds that didn't try to fix, just reminded you. Not alone, you are still whole, even broken wings, remember. How to fly your silence matters. You don't owe anyone your smiles. Left them for strangers. For crew members, for overwhelmed assistants, for quiet voices. Hidden behind loud demand sand, every time she did not, brought her peace back as giving kindness. Had become her anchor bet, something inside her still wondered where was he now. Knuth man who saw her when no one else did, one who gave her silence instead of solution. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. Had stopped death notes, had stopped at bet. Not her growth, she was stronger, no steadier, but still thier. Was a quiet a Keithan one evening at an award show she wasn't planning to attend. Received a last-minute invitation. A director she admired had requested her present. She almost declined until something inside whisper Redgoth Theater was packed a bright light thread. Carpet loud music, but she stayed grounded. Drudentel. She walked through the back hallway and stopped at Beck, 'cause there he was Julianing against the wall, his eyes meeting hers like no time had passed at all. Her breath Cawthon released, and she walked to him, smiled no surprise in his eyes, like he knew she would come meet. He stood in silence for a moment, then he said softly, You've been busy. She laughed quietly. You stopped bringing me tea. He tilted his head. You stopped needing it. She looked down, then up again. I missed it anyway. He handed her a cup just like before. Kamamalono Shigarno. Words needed. Held it like a memory thon. Asked, Where did you go? I didn't go anywhere. He said, I just stepped back so you could step forward. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they didn't spill. They stayed in her lashes soft. Still, you were right. She said, One day I did bring tea to someone else's storm. His smile grew wider. I knew you would. They sat down in the same quiet cornerges like that first night, but this time's wasn't unraveling, was whole change. Drodrin, you never told me her name, Sydney said. The woman who brought you tea backstage when you broke Keanu's eyes, softened. Her name was Maya. She was kind, ordinary in the best way. She stayed until I could see myself again. What happened to her? He paused, looked away. She passed away 2 years later. Cancer, fast and cruel. She gave me something that lasted longer than her life. Sydney reached out and gently touched his hand. Didn't flinch. You honored her, she said. Every time you stayed. Every time you saw someone else in pain. He nodded slowly. That was the only promise I ever made to her. If I see someone breaking, I'll bring tea. And now you're doing it too. They sat in silence for a long time. With world moved outside. Show carried on, but in that quiet corner there was no performance-lively presence. After a while, he looked at her. What will you do now? She thought for a moment. I want to tell stories that remind people they're not alone. Not just in movies, in real life too. He smiled. Then you found your path, she stood to thee, looked at each Etherno, need for goodbye, because nothing was in ding, just evolvingas. She turned to walk back toward the crowd, called out, One last time, Sydney. She looked back, raised his cup in a quiet toast. Keep the tea warm. She smiled as shining always. And then she walked into the lights net to perform Buta Bahers. Selfly Hunden, kind of few weeks latera, new actress. Joined her first big film Nervushuk Citri noticed her right away during. A brack she walked over sat beside Herond, pulled out a small thermos. You look like you need this. The girl took it with trembling hands. Thank you. I'm scared. Sydney nodded. Me too, sometimes, but you don't have to pretend. You just have to breathe and drink tea. It helps. The girl smiled weakly. Do you do this for everyone? Sydney shook her head. Only the ones I see myself in, and just like that in other Stormhead teenother, silence was filled with careened. Somewhere out there, man named Keanu. Reeves smiled to himself, knowing the promise had traveled further than he ever imagined it, through Faminot, through speechies but, through soft moments, warm cup sand, quiet hearts. The air felt heavier that morning, not stormy, just thick, like something important was about to shift. Sydney woke up before her alarm. She lay still in bed, her eyes open, listening to the city breathe outside her window for a moment. I didn't know where she wasted it all. Came back the long shoot the night before, the emotional conversation with Canute, quiet teeth. No testy kindness. Got up and opened the door. Paper bag was missing. For the first time in weeks there was nothing waiting. Scanino Tino folded message. Her chest tightened. Had something happened? Was this goodbye? She stood there for a long time holding the quiethon. She noticed something strange. A small envelope taped to the wall beside her door. Nomino, return just one thing, written in careful lettering. You ready? No. She stared at the words, not understanding. Yet but something in her knew this wasn't absent. Sethis was trust. Opened the envelope with slow fingers. Inside was a single piece of paperone. It were, one day you'll bring tea to someone else's storm. Sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the note. Hands trembled, but not from fear, from knowing shift had come and not outside. What inside? Tevet insideth that night was scheduled to attend a charity galadisons. Of celebrity species almost didn't go bout. Something told her she needed. Tosh wore a simple black dress. No diamond. Snow designer flex, just elegance and easies.
Oh, yikes.
She entered the grand hall, scanned the room instinctively at Keanu. Wasn't there in some hope that was okay, 'cause his voice lived in her now, not just in the notes but in her breath, in her choice. Sat at her table, quiet, lightly nodding at conversations. She wasn't part off when a young singer was brought in, shaky. Why died? Barely 19. Sydney saw herself in the girl's nervous smileth, trembling hands. Practice line sand the fear behind her. Laches. No one noticed the girl melting in the noise except Sydney. Stood, walked across the room and crouched beside her. Hi, she said softly. You doing okay? The girl blinked like she didn't understand the question. Yeah, I'm trying. Sydney reached into her bag, pulled out a small thermosand, handed it to her. Chamomile. Sugar. No expectations either. The girl's eyes welled up instantly, took the tea like it was the first kind thing anyone had given her, and Sydney sat beside Herno. Big words, no advice, just presence, just breath. Girl whispered, thank you. I didn't know anyone could see me here. Sydney smiled gently. I know that feeling. You're not invisible. You're just overwhelmed. It's okay. They sat there as the gala continued around them. Sydney didn't care about the cameras or the speech. Cared about the human beside her, just like Keanu had. Cared about her later that night after the crowd. Thinneth girl leaned toward her and whispered, can I ask you something? Of course, how did you learn to be calm in all this? Sydney Powsett then answered with a smile, someone once brought me tea when I was falling apart. They didn't fix me. They didn't tell me to smile. They just stayed. The girl nodded slowly. I want to be like that for someone too. You will, Sydney said. Just keep your heart open. Even when it hurts. When she returned to her hotel, there was no Tino, no Tenno message about. She no longer felt the absence. Bacos.
Oh, now she understood.
Had never planned to stay forever. Stayed until she could stand on her own, until she could pass the warmth. Forworth. Next morning. She made her own teas. Lowly with Carathon, she wrapped a small paper around I trote. One sentence. AO are not your noise. You are your stillness. She carried it with her all day, waiting not for someone to save her bet, for someone who needed Savingant, when she saw a young wardrobe assistant crying silently behind the dressing Roxy didn't hesitate, walked over and offered the coot no words, no advice, just warmth and. When the girl reached for it with shaking finger, Sydney felt something she hadn't in a long time pass a deep threadrian. Nightus, she lay in bed, the silence didn't feel empty yet felt full bacus. No, she wasn't waiting to be seen, she was seeing, she wasn't begging for kindness, was giving eye tanned in the middle of it. Elsh whispered to herself, "Thank you, Keanu, for reminding me who I am."